The plane is in the air, the clock is running, and by this time tomorrow, either there is a deal or the bombs come back. J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner are on Air Force Two right now, heading to Islamabad for a second round of negotiations with Iran. The same three men, the same table, but a completely different world than the one they left 10 days ago. If you've been following this crisis, drop a comment right now. Do you think they'll get a deal before the truce expires tomorrow? Because here's what changed since that first round failed. The Tuska was seized. Iran fired on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump threatened to destroy power plants and bridges. And Tehran spent days refusing to even confirm whether it would send a delegation to these talks at all, only breaking its silence hours before Vance's plane took off. That silence wasn't indecision. Keep that in mind because it matters more than almost anything else happening today. Let's start with why the same three men are on that plane again, because the answer reveals something important about how Trump is running this negotiation that most coverage is completely missing. Sending Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner back is not a failure of imagination. It is a calculated signal. It tells Tehran that Washington does not consider the collapse of the first round a definitive ending, only an interrupted beginning. The same men, the same mandate, the same willingness to close. In crisis diplomacy, that signal alone can move a negotiation forward when words cannot. If that strategy surprises you, share this with someone who thinks diplomacy is just talking, because what's happening in Islamabad right now is far more calculated than it looks. The first round came closest to a deal on 4 of Iran's 10 stated demands. 21 hours of talks produced a partial draft that Pakistani mediators described with cautious optimism. Then, 3 things collapsed it simultaneously. A leak reached Iranian state media. A Revolutionary Guard commander flew in from Tehran and hardened Iran's position mid-negotiation. And the shadow of Israel, rejecting any deal that didn't include Lebanon, fell over the table at the worst possible moment. Every one of those pressure points still exists today. None of them have been resolved. They have simply been joined by new ones. What makes it possible for these talks to even happen despite that, and this is the part of the story that deserves far more attention than it's getting, is Pakistan. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, and Army Chief General Munir have spent the last 2 weeks doing something extraordinarily difficult, keeping a live communication channel open between Washington and Tehran after the first round collapsed, not solving the conflict, not pushing their own agenda, simply keeping both parties at the table when every headline was pulling them away from it. That is what effective mediation looks like, and Pakistan has done it under conditions that would have broken most diplomatic frameworks entirely. Iran's behavior in the hours before these talks is the most important signal of the day, and it is being underread by nearly every outlet covering this story. Tehran refused to publicly confirm its delegation was coming right up until the last moment. Iranian sources told CNN a delegation would arrive, but the official announcement came on Iran's own terms, on Iran's own timeline, after Vance was already airborne. That is not chaos. That is a regime communicating to its domestic audience that it came to this table by sovereign choice, not at Washington's invitation. Understanding that distinction is the difference between reading this negotiation correctly and misreading it entirely. The team Vance is traveling with tells you everything about how Trump thinks about deal-making at this level. Steve Witkoff has no background in international law or nuclear nonproliferation. What he has is direct access to Trump and the authority to commit on behalf of the White House without checking back. No intermediary, no delay, no risk that a deal falls apart because someone in the chain walks it back. Jared Kushner brings the same direct authority, plus years of cultivated relationships with Gulf leaders, which in this negotiation means Saudi Arabia and the UAE stay aligned with the process rather than pulling against it. Neither man fits the traditional diplomat profile. Both men carry something a career diplomat cannot: the certainty that what they agree to will hold. What Vance actually needs to secure before the truce expires tomorrow is more achievable than headlines suggest, and more fragile than optimists want to believe. He does not need a permanent peace agreement. He needs a ceasefire extension. That means Iran accepting more time without the naval blockade being lifted first, which has been Tehran's public precondition. And it means Trump being able to present that extension as something other than a capitulation, which requires some visible Iranian gesture on the nuclear program or the strait that Washington can point to as a concession. That is the minimum architecture of a deal, a narrow corridor, but a real one. The security preparations in Islamabad say something worth noting. Thousands of personnel deployed, routes to the airport locked down tighter than the first round. Local analysts suggest the increased preparations anticipate the possible arrival of the Iranian foreign minister in person, which would elevate these talks from a continuation of a failed process into something with far more political weight. When a foreign minister shows up, it means the government he represents considers the meeting serious enough to risk being seen at. China has weighed in. Beijing's foreign ministry called this a critical phase of transition between war and peace, and called on all parties to show maximum sincerity and maintain the momentum of the ceasefire. Read that carefully. When China tells Iran not to leave the table, Iran listens, because no country has more economic leverage over Tehran right now than Beijing. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan was more direct, stating publicly that both Iran and the United States have the will to continue talks. Pakistan, Turkey, China, and the White House are all using the same language. That convergence of message is not coincidence. It is coordinated diplomatic pressure, and it is one of the most underreported assets the negotiators in Islamabad have walking into that room. Vance is 41 years old. He is the youngest vice president in decades. He wrote a memoir about poverty in rural America and became one of the most combative voices in Trumpist politics. He is not the profile anyone would have drawn for the man sitting across from Iranian negotiators with a deadline of tomorrow and the prospect of resumed bombing if he walks out empty-handed. But he holds the one thing no career diplomat in the world can offer right now: Trump's personal trust. Any agreement Vance signs will not be second-guessed. It will not be walked back. It will hold, because Vance is not representing the State Department. He is representing the man in the Oval Office directly. In this specific negotiation, that is worth more than any number of years spent studying the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Here is what is really at stake in the next few hours, and this is the part that goes far beyond the ceasefire itself. Since the first strikes of Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, energy prices have risen in ways that are now affecting household budgets in 162 countries. The system of free international navigation, the invisible infrastructure that moves roughly 40% of global trade, has been challenged in ways no single treaty can quickly restore. And the question of whether nuclear proliferation can be contained through diplomacy or whether the only remaining answer is preemptive military force is being answered in real time in a conference room in Islamabad. What happens in the next 12 to 18 hours will not close those questions, but it may determine whether the world gets more time to search for answers or is forced to start living with the consequences of not having found them. We are tracking every development from Islamabad as it happens and breaking down what it actually means, not just what it looks like on the surface. If today's analysis gave you something the headlines didn't, hit subscribe. We do this every single day because in a crisis that moves this fast, daily analysis is the only kind that keeps up. What do you think happens before that truce expires tomorrow? A deal? A collapse? Or something in between that nobody's predicting yet? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and right now your read on this might be sharper than what's coming out of the briefing rooms.